October 19th, 1943, 02:16 hours, Pearl Harbor, Oahu. The light in the Combat Intelligence Center isn't bright so much as it is tired. Yellow bulbs, cigarette haze, and the sheen of sweat on men who haven't seen a bed in 2 nights. A ceiling fan pushes hot air in slow circles like it's bored of the war. Lieutenant Commander Edwin T. Layton, Nimitz's intelligence officer, stands with his sleeves rolled up, forearms braced against a table that's been taken over by paper. Not neat paper, war paper. Captured charts still smelling faintly of salt and engine oil. A Japanese hydrographic map folded and unfolded until the creases have turned white. Someone has dragged in a big magnifying lamp from the photographic shop, its metal shade dented like it's been kicked. The circle of light it casts is hard, surgical. Across from Layton is a woman in a navy gray skirt and blouse, her hair pinned up, her fingers stained with graphite. She's not in uniform, not exactly. Civilian. Library staff borrowed into war work. Her badge reads, Agnes Meyer, Cartographic Section, Naval District Library. She doesn't look up when the door opens. She's listening with her eyes. Behind Layton, Captain Jasper Holmes, Submarine Force staff, a man with a submariner's squint and a grin that never quite commits, leans against a filing cabinet. He's holding a chipped coffee mug like it's a weapon. On the far side of the table, a young radio man from Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, FRUPAC, waits with a notepad, trying not to breathe too loudly. The kid's eyes keep flicking to the clock, like the minute hand might bring good news with it. Layton taps a point on the chart with the back of a pencil. The pencil is worn down almost to the ferrule. This is what they say they have, he murmurs. Meyer finally speaks, voice soft but sure. And this is what they drew, she answers. You can almost feel the room tighten at that. In war, there are 2 truths, what a man tells you and what his hands can't help but reveal. Holmes steps forward. Agnes, he says, like he's trying to keep it light. Show him. Meyer slides the captured Japanese chart toward her, then pulls another sheet alongside it, a U.S. Navy chart of the Central Pacific. Same ocean, same latitudes, different silences. The Japanese chart is crowded with careful detail, soundings, reef edges, tiny kanji notes like whispers. The American one is cleaner, simpler. Too clean. Blank water where no one has bothered to look close. Meyer puts a ruler down, not for measuring distance, at least not yet. She uses it to straighten the paper, a librarian's habit. Order as a form of courage. What is it? Layton asks, but he already knows it's something. His eyes have that look, the look of a man who has been wronged by a map. Meyer's finger moves to a patch of ocean on the Japanese chart, an area that, on the American chart, is little more than blue nothing with a few dotted lines. Her nail stops on a faint ring, almost erased by time, almost dismissed by anyone who isn't paid to notice. Here, she says, they've marked a lagoon. Holmes lets out a breath through his nose. A lagoon, he repeats, testing the word as if it might break. Layton's pencil hovers. There's no atoll there on ours. Exactly, Meyer says. That's why it matters. A nearby typewriter clacks somewhere in the building, rapid, impatient. A telephone rings once, twice, then stops. The war is always tugging at sleeves. Layton leans closer, eyes narrowing under the magnifier's harsh circle. The Japanese line work is confident. The reef contour is not decorative. It's a promise. Soundings are noted as if ships have been there, repeatedly, carefully. Not a guess, not a rumor. Meyer traces along the edge of the lagoon with the tip of her pencil. They've corrected it. See the overwriting? The old reef line was here. Then someone resurveyed. That means traffic. That means use. Holmes's grin finally commits. Which means, he says, they've got something out there. Layton doesn't look up. Or they want us to think they've got something out there. Meyer turns her head just enough to meet his eyes. Then they wouldn't waste survey time, she says simply. Hydrography is expensive. They survey what they plan to need. The young Frupack radio man swallows. Sir, he says, unable to stop himself. We've had... He checks his notes like he's afraid the paper will accuse him. We've had low-grade traffic referencing a code group we can't place. Something like a station, but no known island. Layton finally straightens. For a moment, the fatigue slips, and something sharper replaces it. He looks at Holmes, then back at Meyer, and you can see it happen. The invisible becomes a target. Outside, somewhere on Ford Island, an engine coughs to life. In the darkness, a plane is being warmed, checked, armed. Men move with flashlights taped and shaded, the way you move when you want the enemy to keep sleeping. Layton flips the chart corner back and reads the marginalia, lips moving silently. He speaks again, lower now, like he's saying it to himself. Uncharted atolls, he says. Hidden anchorages. Meyer nods. If you don't know the reef is there, she replies, you don't look for ships behind it. Holmes sets his mug down with a soft clink. And if you don't look, he says, voice tightening, you don't bomb them. The room's heat suddenly feels different. Not just tropical heat, pressure. The kind you feel when a door opens in your mind and you realize the hallway beyond is full of consequences. Layton reaches for a grease pencil and with a quick, decisive motion circles the lagoon on the American chart, on the blank blue nothing, drawing an island into existence as if by command. Then he pauses. He doesn't circle one spot. He circles 3. Because once you understand the trick, once you see that the Japanese are telling on themselves through their charts, you start scanning the rest of the paper for other places where the enemy's confidence is stronger than your ignorance. Meyer's eyes are already there. She has moved on without asking permission, comparing reef shapes, soundings, tiny notation habits. She's not thinking like a sailor or an aviator. She's thinking like someone who has spent her life catching lies by the way they are filed. There, she says again, and again. Each time, the same pattern. On the Japanese chart, detail. On the American chart, emptiness. Holmes whistles softly, a sound that would be casual anywhere else, but here feels like a fuse catching. How many? He asks. Meyer doesn't answer immediately. She's counting, but not just counting dots. She's weighing intent. Enough, she says at last. Enough to matter. Layton looks around the room as if seeing it for the first time, the men, the smoke, the piles of paper, the clock chewing through the night. There is a moment when you can feel history pivot, not with a speech, but with a pencil mark. He reaches for the phone. Get me Admiral Nimitz's duty officer, he says. The radio man's pen scratches hard. Holmes's eyes brighten, like a man who's just been handed a knife in the dark. Meyer's hands stay steady, but her throat moves when she swallows, because she knows what happens when a blank spot on a map becomes a place. It becomes a place men die for. Layton waits for the line to connect, staring at the circled blue nothing on the American chart. You can almost hear the ocean in it, the surf against reef, the slap of lagoon water against a hidden hull. And then, faintly, from the doorway behind them, A voice that shouldn't be there at this hour. An ensign from operations, hair still damp from rain, breathing like he ran. "Sir," the ensign says, eyes wide, "we just recovered more material from the last raid. Japanese chart folios, whole bundle." Leighton's expression doesn't change much, but the room changes anyway, because now it isn't one chart, it's a library. And Agnes Meyer, the librarian who knows how to make paper talk, is about to give the Pacific Fleet something it has been missing since the first day of the war. A way to see the enemy's invisible air war, before the enemy can move. Holmes leans closer to Leighton and speaks low enough that only the men at the table can hear. "If she's right," he says, "we've been flying past their staging bases for months." Leighton's eyes lock on the circled lagoon. His voice comes out like steel cooled in seawater. "Then we stop flying past them," he says. And in the yellow lamplight, as more captured charts are carried in, still damp, still folded tight from Japanese hands, the first realization hits like a punch. The next big strike in the Pacific won't start with a bomber. It will start with a map. The bundle of charts lands on the table with a wet slap, as if the ocean refuses to let go of them. They're still stiff in places from salt water. The edges curl. A corner is torn where someone, Japanese or American, grabbed too hard in a moment when minutes mattered. The ensign who carried them in stands back like he's delivered something volatile. Agnes Meyer doesn't flinch. She reaches out and touches the top sheet with the pads of her fingers, gentle as a conservator handling a rare book. Except this book once helped kill Americans. Captain Jasper Holmes drags an ashtray closer and drops a cigarette into it without taking his eyes off the paper. "Where'd these come from?" he asks. "Recovered off Macon," the ensign answers. "From a float. Debris field after the raid. They were in an oilskin wrap. Somebody tied it to a wooden crate, like they thought it might come back for it." Leighton's gaze lifts for a fraction of a second, then returns to the table. "Or like they knew we'd find it," he says. That's the habit of intelligence men. You don't just ask what something is, you ask what it wants you to believe. Meyer slides the first folio open, and the room fills with line work, latticed coastlines, depth soundings, compass roses, small black symbols for reefs and rocks that have cored more ships than any gun. The Japanese surveyors drew the ocean the way a surgeon draws veins. She rotates the map so north is correct to the table, then places a translucent overlay sheet on top. She has brought it in a portfolio of her own: tracing film, a soft graphite pencil, 2 rulers, and a pair of dividers. Nothing glamorous. Tools of quiet conquest. Holmes watches her hands. "You've done this before," he says. Meyer's lips tighten, not in pride, but in concentration. "I've repaired atlases from the 1700s, she replies. Paper tells you when it's been handled often, when it's been handled recently. Leighton gestures at one corner of the folio. "That crease?" he asks. Meyer leans in. "Fresh. The fold lines are sharp. They didn't sit in a drawer for a year. Someone carried this." Holmes nods, as if that alone is confirmation enough. In a war of machines, human habits are still the easiest things to track. The Frupack radio man, still hovering like a ghost with a pencil, clears his throat. "Sir," he says, "we can correlate. If you can give me likely latitudes, I can go back through the traffic. Sometimes the call signs repeat in the same zone." Leighton points a pencil at him without looking away from the chart. "Do it," he says, "and don't assume it's where we think it is. Assume we were wrong." That stings because it's true. The Pacific is enormous, but the United States Navy has a way of behaving like the blank blue spaces are empty just because American charts say so. Meyer begins to work. She doesn't start by hunting for airfields or anchorages. She starts by hunting for the signature of attention. Clusters of soundings taken closer together than normal, annotations that imply a safe approach channel, a reef line that has been revised. Details that don't exist to satisfy curiosity, details that exist to keep ships from dying in the dark. She moves from page to page like she's scanning index cards. Then she stops. Her pencil hovers above a small crescent of reef. Leighton senses it before she speaks. "What is it?" he asks. Meyer points. "This atoll," she says. "There are approach bearings marked. And here, look." She slides the magnifying lamp closer. Under the circle of light, a note appears in tiny characters. The Frupac radio man can't read it, but the intelligence men can recognize what it means. A caution about depths, and a reference to fuel handling. Holmes's eyebrows rise. "Fuel," he repeats. Leighton's eyes narrow. "Tank farm?" he asks. "Could be," Meyer answers. "Or a depot. Something worth warning your own navigators about." Holmes gives a short laugh that isn't humor. "You don't warn pilots about a reef unless you plan to fly them there more than once." Meyer's gaze shifts to another mark. "And here," she says, "there's a symbol for a radio station. Not a big one, but—" Leighton's pencil taps the table twice. "Radio and fuel," he says softly. The room is quiet enough that the fan's slow click becomes audible. Somewhere outside, a truck backfires. No one reacts. The only danger in this room is what they're learning. Holmes turns his head slightly toward Leighton. "How does this help the air war?" he asks, though the question is almost rhetorical. Leighton answers anyway because the words have weight. "If there's staging out there," he says, "they can extend their search arcs. They can refuel flying boats. They can move aircraft forward without us seeing it. They can hide float planes behind reefs. It's reach." He looks down at the empty space on the American chart again. Blank blue. And now, in his mind, it is crowded with unseen objects. Fuel drums, antenna masts, moored tenders, men in rubber boots rolling bombs out of crates. You can almost smell it. Aviation gasoline and coral dust. Meyer pulls a U.S. chart closer and aligns it with the Japanese one. She uses the dividers to transfer a distance between two known points, adjusting for scale. It's the kind of work that looks slow until you realize every motion is practiced. Holmes leans in. "What's the nearest known island?" he asks. Meyer names it, then gives another and another, stitching geography together like a seamstress. Leighton watches her, and you can see his respect growing, not as a performance, but as necessity. In this moment, she is not a librarian. She is an instrument. The Frupac radio man flips pages fast. "If that's the latitude," he mutters. "We had traffic, low power, 3 nights ago. Repeated bursts, same group. We couldn't place it." Leighton looks at him sharply. "From where?" "Direction finding gave us a wedge," the radio man says, drawing in the air like he can shape it into truth. "But nothing in the wedge. Not on our charts." Meyer doesn't smile. She just keeps working. Holmes turns his attention back to the charts. "How many of these places are we missing?" he asks. Meyer spreads 2 more sheets, then 3. Each has a patch of ocean that on American charts is underdescribed, underloved. The Japanese, meanwhile, have measured it like someone planning a move. Leighton's hand slides toward the phone again. "We need to brief SyncPack," he says. Holmes exhales. "You're going to walk into Nimitz's office at this hour and tell him a librarian found the war?" Leighton finally looks up, and the intensity in his eyes makes the joke die. I'm going to tell him we've been blind, he says, and she just handed us eyes. Meyer pauses, pencil midair. Sir, she says quietly. Leighton turns to her. Yes? There's something else, she says. In any other room, those words might be small. Here, they land like a dropped wrench. She flips a chart over and traces a faint dotted line, so light it could be dismissed as an old pencil mark. It runs between two atolls, not as a shipping lane for cargo vessels, but as something narrower, more purposeful. A route, Holmes says, leaning closer. A tender route, Meyer answers. See the waypoints? They're close to reef passes. This isn't someone crossing open ocean. This is someone moving from lagoon to lagoon. Leighton's mind goes immediately to the Japanese Navy's long-range reconnaissance, the Kawanishi H-8K flying boats, the Emily that can reach far and come back, to the tenders that service them, to the way a flying boat can land in a lagoon, refuel, repair, and vanish before dawn. If the Japanese have a chain of hidden lagoons, they can project air power like a knife sliding under a door. Holmes's jaw tightens. They've built themselves a stepping stone highway, he says. And we didn't even know the stones existed, Leighton answers. For a second, Meyer looks like she wants to say something more and doesn't. She presses her lips together, then speaks anyway. These charts weren't meant for show, she says. They were meant for work. They're lived in. Whoever had them used them a lot. Leighton nods slowly. A navigator, he says. Holmes corrects him with a quiet certainty. A planner, he says. A man responsible for keeping aircraft alive. A man responsible for making sure the next strike arrives where it's supposed to. The Frupac radio man's pencil stops. Sir, he says, if that's true, if there's a chain out there, then their traffic isn't random. It's logistical. Leighton's eyes go distant, seeing beyond the paper. Which means, he says, we can predict it. Holmes gives a single sharp nod. And kill it, he adds. The air in the room feels cooler now, not because the night has changed, but because the idea has. Leighton looks down at the Japanese chart again, at the careful contour of reef and lagoon. It's beautiful, in a way that's almost obscene. The enemy drew these places with love and precision, and that love is about to betray them. Agnes, Leighton says, voice controlled, I need you to mark every location where their detail exceeds ours. Every lagoon with revised soundings, every approach channel, every symbol that suggests fuel, radio, or maintenance. Meyer nods once. Yes, sir. Holmes takes a cigarette, thinks better of lighting it, and just rolls it between his fingers. What do we do with it? He asks. Leighton answers like he's already on the next move. We turn map work into target folders, he says. We cue search planes. We cue submarines. We cue B-24s out of the Gilberts. We make their hiding places loud. The ensign in the doorway shifts, uneasy. Sir, he says, won't they move once we hit one? Holmes looks at him with something almost kind. Of course they will, he says. That's why we hit the whole chain. Leighton points at the dotted route again. And we don't just hit it, he says. We close it. We make it unsafe to use. We force them back into the open ocean where our search can find them. Meyer's pencil scratches across tracing film. Circle. Note. Circle. Note. Each mark is a future explosion, a future fire, a future letter home. She pauses at one atoll in particular, her hand still. Leighton sees it. That one? He asks. Meyer's voice lowers. This one has more annotations than the others, she says. multiple dates, corrections, and here, this symbol appears twice. Holmes leans in. What symbol? Meyer taps it with the pencil tip. A small mark, easy to miss. To her, it's a scream. Aviation, she says. Not just anchorage, not just a radio mast. Something built for aircraft. Leighton's throat tightens. Because if that's true, it's not just a refueling stop. It's a hidden base, a place where aircraft can stage, hide, and strike, without ever showing on the American picture of the war. Holmes straightens slowly, like a man who has heard a door open behind him. Name it, he says. Give it a name so we can put it on an operations board. Meyer looks at the blank on the American chart where it should be, and answers the only way she can. It doesn't have an American name, she says. Not yet. Leighton's pencil hovers above the emptiness. The fan turns, the clock ticks. The entire Pacific seems to hold its breath. Then Leighton draws a small circle and writes in block letters firm enough to dent the paper. He invents a name for a place that will soon be lit by burning fuel and falling bombs. And as the ink dries, you can feel the next step approaching. The moment when this quiet discovery leaves the chart room and climbs into the sky, with men who will have to trust it. Because in a few hours, pilots will be briefed on a target that technically doesn't exist, and someone will have to fly straight into the blank. The operations hut at Hickam Field smells like damp canvas and old coffee. The rain has eased off, but the humidity stays, clinging to skin, softening paper, making everything feel slightly blurred at the edges. A dozen air crewmen sit on wooden benches, Mae West vests hanging loose, sleeves rolled, boots planted wide. They look like men who have learned not to waste expression until a mission gives them reason. On the front wall, a chart has been pinned up with thumbtacks. It's a Pacific grid with a fresh circle drawn in grease pencil. Next to it, taped crookedly, is a neat tracing overlay with annotations in sharp graphite. A new island, new to them, has been drawn into existence. Commander Edwin Leighton stands off to the side, not in the center like a showman. Intelligence men rarely do. The man holding the floor is a Navy lieutenant from Patrol Wing 2, flight jacket unzipped, eyes ringed with fatigue and skepticism. He raps a knuckle against the chart. Target area is here, he says. Approximately, he glances at the overlay as if it might change its mind. Approximately at this position. Uncharted on U.S. charts. A ripple of movement runs through the benches. A pilot at the back lets out a short, disbelieving breath. Uncharted, someone repeats. Another voice, rough with cigarettes. So what? We're hunting ghosts now? The lieutenant's jaw tightens. He's an operator. He wants this to be clean. But war isn't clean, and neither is the ocean. We're hunting what the enemy knows that we don't, he says. A hand goes up. A young navigator with a thin mustache, rank patch worn shiny. Sir, he asks, who confirmed it? The lieutenant hesitates a fraction, just long enough for doubt to bloom. Leighton steps forward then, smoothly, before the pause becomes a mutiny. He doesn't announce himself. He simply speaks in the calm, precise tone of a man who understands that pilots do not fly for theories. This came from captured Japanese hydrographic charts, Leighton says. Charts that show detailed soundings, reef lines, approach channels, and servicing annotations where our charts show open water. These are not rumors. They're measurements. A pilot with sunburned cheeks leans forward, elbows on knees. Sir, he says, with respect, Japanese charts can be wrong. We've all seen it. Leighton nods once. So can ours, he replies. That lands harder than an argument. Because every man in that hut has a private memory of trusting a chart and nearly dying for it. The lieutenant points at the overlay. "We believe this is a hidden tender stop," he says, "possibly servicing long-range flying boats. There may be fuel, there may be radio, there may be a moored seaplane tender." A veteran crew chief snorts softly. "And there may be nothing." You can almost feel the room splitting into two kinds of fear. Fear of flying into the unknown, and fear of letting the enemy keep it. Leighton leans closer to the chart, indicating a dotted line drawn between atolls. "They've built themselves a chain," he says. "A stepping stone route. If we can break even one link, make one lagoon unsafe, we force their flying boats to operate at the edge of their range. That reduces their search coverage. That reduces their warning time. That means fewer surprises for our carriers and convoys." A man in the front row, an aircraft commander with gray at his temples, turns his head slightly, eyes narrowing. "So this is about the next carrier move," he says. Not a question. Leighton meets his gaze. "It's about every move," he says. "The enemy's eyes extend their reach. Blind them, and the ocean gets smaller." The lieutenant clears his throat, regaining the room. "Patrol aircraft will make first contact," he says. "We're sending 2 PBY Catalinas out at first light. Long endurance. Visual confirmation. Photography. If they find activity, we'll cue a follow-up strike package." A murmur. PBY crews exchange glances. The Catalina is slow, sturdy, a boat with wings. Perfect for lingering. Terrible for escaping if the enemy has fighters. A radio man in the back raises a hand. "Sir," he says, "if it's uncharted, how do we land? How do we even approach to photograph without reefing ourselves?" The lieutenant gestures at the overlay. "Approach bearings are marked," he says. "Reef pass here. Soundings indicate—" He pauses, then admits it. "Indicate a navigable channel. But you'll be doing it by eye." By eye. In the Pacific. Over coral that can rip an aircraft open like tin. Leighton watches the faces, seeing the calculation. These men aren't cowards. They're professionals, weighing risk like currency. In the back of the hut, Agnes Meyer stands quietly near the door, half in shadow. She wasn't invited to brief pilots. She's there because Leighton insisted. Not as a symbol, but as insurance, because she knows the paper better than anyone. She holds a folder against her chest like a shield. The gray-templed aircraft commander glances toward her, curious. "Who's that?" he asks under his breath. Leighton answers evenly. "Miss Meyer," he says. "Cartographic section. She's the one who identified the discrepancies." A beat of silence. Then, not cruel but blunt, a pilot says what a dozen men are thinking. "A librarian?" Meyer's cheeks color slightly. Not embarrassment, something more like irritation, carefully controlled. Leighton's voice stays level, but it gains an edge. "She reads maps the way some of you read the sky," he says. "And right now, I'd rather fly with someone who notices what's missing." The lieutenant moves on, but the mood has changed. The room is listening now, not because they've been convinced, but because they've realized someone in intelligence is betting his reputation on this. He points to the time hack. "Wheels up at 0540, he says. "Rendezvous at—" And as he speaks, you can almost hear the Pacific outside the hut, dark and indifferent. The enemy is out there, hidden behind reefs and distance, trusting in the blank spaces. The briefing ends the way briefings always end, with forced confidence, clipped instructions, and men standing up all at once, as if motion can push doubt away. Outside, the dawn is only a suggestion, a faint lightening at the horizon. Ground crews move around the PBYs with flashlights shaded in their palms. The Catalinas sit on the tarmac like heavy birds, dull paint beaded with moisture. The aircraft commander, Lieutenant J.G. Robert Bob Haskins, walks toward his plane with his navigator, Ensign Paul Tirada, and a crew that has learned to make jokes in the face of long water. Tirada keeps looking at the overlay copy he's been given. It's folded and refolded, the creases already forming. He glances up at the sky, then down at the paper again, as if he expects them to disagree. "You trust this?" Haskins asks quietly, not for the crew to hear. Tirada hesitates. "I trust the soundings more than I trust the blank," he says finally. Haskins gives a short nod. "Good answer," he murmurs. They climb aboard. The cockpit is cramped, metal cold under the fingertips despite the humid air. Switches click. Engines whine, cough, then settle into a deep, vibrating roar that you feel in your ribs. As the Catalina rolls, you can almost taste the exhaust, oil and heat, and the faint metallic tang of risk. The plane lifts into the dimness, wheels leaving the ground with a smooth inevitability. The island of Oahu falls away behind them, lights shrinking, the sea swallowing everything. Hours pass in the steady drone of patrol flight. Ocean, cloud, ocean again. The sun climbs, the cockpit warms. The crew settles into the rhythm of scanning, and then the world begins to change. Not dramatically, not with a shouted alarm, with a subtle shift in the color of the water. Tirada leans forward, face close to the glass. Below, the Pacific's deep blue lightens, first to cobalt, then to turquoise. A smear of pale green appears like a bruise under the surface. Coral. Haskins' hand tightens on the yoke. "You seeing this?" he asks. "Yeah," Tirada replies, voice suddenly tight. "Reef line." The Catalina banks, slow and cautious, like a man leaning around a corner. The reef resolves into a curve, then a ring. White surf breaks along it in a continuous line, and inside the ring the water is calm, glassy, a lagoon that looks like a secret kept too long. It's real. It's there. And it is not on the American chart that men died trusting. The crew goes quiet, the way you go quiet in a church or a graveyard. Tirada unfolds the overlay with hands that are suddenly not quite steady. He matches the reef shape to the tracing. It fits. It fits too well. Haskins drops the nose slightly, bringing them lower. "Keep us out of range," he mutters, though he doesn't know what range is yet. Range of guns, range of eyes. The lagoon is empty at first glance, just water, just reef, just the deceptive peace of a place no one is supposed to know. Then the radio man, peering through binoculars, inhales sharply. "Skipper," he says. Haskins doesn't look away. "What?" The radio man's voice drops. "Wake," he says. "Inside the lagoon. Wake line. Something moved recently." A wake in still water is a confession. Tirada shifts to the side window, searching. He sees it then, faint, curved, like a finger dragged through glass. And near it, so small at first he doubts his eyes, a dark shape against the lagoon's pale surface. Not coral, not shadow. Steel. Haskins' pulse hammers. "That's a hull," he says. The radio man swallows. "And there's more," he adds, voice rising despite himself. "I see barrels, crates, something along the shore." The Catalina continues its slow bank, and the lagoon gives up another secret. A thin line on the water near the reef pass, like a boom or a net. A defensive measure. Someone is home. Haskins reaches for the intercom. His voice is steady, but you can hear the strain underneath it. "Camera," he orders. "Get me photos, now." and keep your head down." Tarada watches the shoreline through the glass and feels his stomach sink, not from fear of crashing, but from the certainty of consequence. Because on the beach, near a patch of scrub, there's a shape that doesn't belong on an uninhabited atoll. A straight line, a mast, an antenna, and beside it, a faint scar in the coral, cleared, leveled. Not a runway, not yet, but a start. In the cockpit, the air suddenly feels thin. The Catalina's shadow crosses the lagoon, and for a fraction of a second, you can imagine someone below looking up, squinting, raising a hand to shade their eyes. Then the radio man jerks back from the window. "Flashes," he says. "On the shore, flashes." Haskins doesn't need clarification. He's seen that kind of sparkle before. Sunlight off a rifle barrel, or a signal mirror, or the first muzzle flash of a gun that's just realized it's been discovered. The first rounds don't sound like thunder, not at this distance. They sound like someone snapping twigs in a dry forest. In the Catalina's cockpit, Lieutenant J.J. Bob Haskins sees the tiny puffs along the shore a half-second after the radio man calls them. Little bites of white against green scrub. The Japanese gunners are walking their fire like they're tracing the plane with a pencil. "Stay steady," Tarada says, but it comes out more like a plea than advice. Haskins keeps the bank shallow. Too steep and he loses altitude. Too shallow and he stays inside their comfort zone. The Catalina is not built for sudden heroics. It's a patrol boat with wings, large, slow, stubborn. If the enemy has a proper anti-aircraft piece hidden under camouflage netting, this could end fast. "Photographer," Haskins barks into the intercom. "Tell me you got it." A muffled voice from the back. "Working." Another crackle. "We're getting frames. Hull, shore installations." A sharp metallic ping cuts through the engine roar. Tarada flinches. "That was us," he says. Haskins' eyes flick to the right. A spiderweb crack blooms in the side panel glass near the navigator's station. "Everybody down!" Haskins shouts, as if volume alone can push bullets away. The radio man drops lower, still peering through binoculars from a hunched posture. "I see a tender," he says, voice tight. "Small. And, Skipper, there's a float plane. It's pulled up. They've got a ramp." That changes everything. A tender means fuel, maintenance, radios. A float plane ramp means routine operations. This isn't a fisherman's camp. This is a node in a network. Tarada's pencil scratches across his kneeboard. Notes turning into coordinates, turning into targets. He feels a strange detachment, like his hand belongs to someone else, because part of his mind is already imagining the briefing room back at Hickam, the disbelief, and then the moment these photos hit the table like a slap. Haskins pushes the throttles forward. The engines respond with a deeper vibration, but speed is relative. The Catalina surges like a heavy ship catching wind. Rounds crack again. Another ping. Something hits the wing float, dull, ugly. "Damage?" Haskins calls. "Float's taking hits," comes the reply from the engineer. "No fuel leak seen." Haskins' jaw tightens. He wants one more pass, just one. Enough to confirm the boom, the radio mast, the crates, the tender's markings. But every second he stays is a second the Japanese have to adjust their aim, to wake up fully, to get something heavier into action. Tarada leans forward, squinting through the cracked glass. The lagoon is a postcard of calm, but the shore is now alive with movement. Tiny figures running, a truck kicking up pale dust, a group dragging something long and dark toward the waterline. "A gun?" Tarada asks. "Could be," the radio man says. Or a fuel hose, hard to tell. Then Haskins sees it, a ripple of white on the lagoon surface. Not from surf, but from a boat accelerating. A motor launch cutting toward the reef pass. They're moving, he mutters. They're not just shooting, they're clearing out. Tarada's voice drops. Or they're sending word, he says. That's the nightmare. Discovery isn't just about what you saw. It's about what the enemy now knows you saw. If a radio station is on that atoll, the warning could leap across the Pacific faster than any bomber. Haskins doesn't hesitate anymore. We're done, he says. Climb. He noses up gently, coaxing altitude out of a heavy airframe. The shoreline shrinks. The muzzle flashes become pinpricks. Then, mercifully, nothing. For a moment, the Catalina is just a plane again. The ocean, just water. Nobody speaks. The crew listens to the engines, to the wind, to the small groans of metal that might mean something is failing. Tarada unfolds the overlay once more, stares at the pencil circle where Agnes Meyer's careful hand had translated Japanese certainty into an American target. He imagines her in the chart room, calm under lamplight, and feels a flicker of gratitude so sharp it surprises him. We're going to get back, Haskins says quietly, like he's promising himself as much as anyone else. The radio man taps his headset. I'll send contact report, he says. Not yet, Haskins replies. Wait until we're farther. If they're listening. He doesn't finish. Nobody needs him to. Radio waves are as dangerous as bullets. They put distance between themselves and the atoll, the water deepening beneath them until the reef's turquoise fades to blue again. Only then does the radio man transmit, brief, coded, precise. A message that will travel like lightning to Pearl. Uncharted atoll confirmed. Enemy installation observed. Tender present. Defensive fire encountered. Back at Pearl Harbor, the message lands in Layton's hands, while the Combat Intelligence Center is still running on coffee and adrenaline. It arrives on thin paper, typed hard. Layton reads it once, then again, like he's trying to catch any hint of exaggeration. He doesn't find it. He looks up at Agnes Meyer, who has been at the table for hours, tracing and marking, her pencil stubs piling up like spent cartridges. It's there, he says. Meyer's shoulders slacken a fraction. Not relief, validation. She nods once. Then the chart was honest, she replies. Holmes is already moving, snagging a phone receiver, calling operations. Get me patrol wing, he snaps, and tell them this isn't a patrol problem anymore. Layton's mind is sprinting through implications. If one hidden node exists, the others likely do too. The Japanese have been using geography like camouflage. They've extended their reconnaissance, staged aircraft, moved tenders, and kept the entire apparatus concealed behind American ignorance. Now, the concealment is gone. The question becomes, how fast can the U.S. Navy turn paper knowledge into explosive action? Admiral Chester W. Nimitz's headquarters is awake by the time Layton arrives with the photographs. Nimitz stands behind his desk, lean and composed. A man whose calm is not the absence of stress, but the mastery of it. He takes the prints and studies them without speaking, his eyes absorbing details like a camera. A staff officer points with a pencil. That's a hull, he says. Likely a seaplane tender. Another points at the shore. Crates, fuel drums, radio mast. Nimitz doesn't react outwardly. He just looks at Layton. How did you find this? He asks. Layton answers simply. Captured Japanese charts, he says, and Miss Meyer's analysis. She identified uncharted atolls where their detail indicated operational use. Nimitz's gaze shifts to Meyer, who stands slightly behind Leighton, hands clasped, posture straight. She looks out of place in that room of uniforms and rank insignia, but her eyes don't drop. Nimitz nods to her once. Not ceremony, recognition. Then he turns back to the map on his wall, the great Pacific grid that commands every decision. He sees, perhaps for the first time, that the ocean isn't empty. It's full of places the enemy has claimed in pencil and used in silence. "What's the nearest strike asset?" Nimitz asks. A staff officer answers quickly. B-24s out of the Ellis and Gilberts can reach with staging. Carrier aircraft, depending on task force position. Submarines could interdict. Nimitz's eyes narrow slightly. "We need it hit hard enough that it can't be reused," he says. "Not a pinprick." Holmes steps forward, unable to keep the eagerness out of his voice. "Sir," he says, "if this is one link in a chain, we should strike the chain. Don't let them adapt. Don't let them just shift to the next lagoon." A silence follows. This is the kind of suggestion that sounds bold and clean in a chart room and becomes messy when you assign men and fuel and time to it. Nimitz considers, then asks the question that matters. "How confident are we in the other locations?" he says. Leighton glances at Meyer. She doesn't hesitate. "High," she says. "The pattern repeats. Revised soundings, approach channels, operational symbols. It's consistent." Nimitz looks back at Leighton. "Can we get confirmation without tipping our hand?" he asks. Leighton's expression tightens. He knows the answer is not entirely. Every patrol plane that goes out is a chance to be seen. Every sighting report invites the enemy to scatter. But the longer they wait, the more time the Japanese have to move and reinforce. Holmes answers instead, voice low. "Sir, we've already tipped something," he says. "They shot at our Catalina. They know we saw them." Nimitz's jaw sets. That's the moment the decision crystallizes, not out of anger, but out of necessity. "Then we move," Nimitz says. Orders begin to flow like water through channels. Reconnaissance stepped up, strike planning initiated, submarines repositioned to watch reef passes and lagoon exits. The war machine starts to turn, and you can feel the inertia of months of blind patrol suddenly shifting into purpose. Back in the intelligence room, Meyer keeps working, while others celebrate quietly. She doesn't look triumphant. She looks burdened. Holmes notices. "You okay?" he asks. Meyer's eyes stay on the chart. "People are going to die because I drew circles," she says softly. Holmes doesn't soften it with lies. "People have been dying because we didn't know where to look," he replies. "Now we do." Meyer's pencil pauses again. She points to another atoll in the chain, the one with the densest annotations, the one Leighton named on the blank American chart. "This one," she says. "This one is bigger, more infrastructure, more care in the survey. If they're staging anywhere, it's here." Leighton steps closer. "If we hit that," he says, thinking aloud, "we might cripple their forward reconnaissance for weeks." Holmes's grin returns, but it's colder now. "Or we might flush something bigger," he says. Leighton looks up sharply. "What do you mean?" Holmes taps the dotted route on the Japanese chart. "If this is a highway," he says, "then somewhere on it is a hub, a place they can't afford to lose, a place they'll defend." Leighton feels the hairs on his arms lift, because the Pacific Air War isn't won by counting planes. It's won by controlling information. Who sees first? Who strikes first? Who can move unseen? And if Agnes Meyer's map hack has just exposed a hidden hub, then the next strike won't just destroy fuel and radios. It will force the enemy to show his hand. Leighton looks at the circled atoll again, the invented American name beside it, and realizes the trap forming. If they hit it, the Japanese will react, and that reaction, if they can read it in time, might reveal the rest of the network. Holmes leans in, voice a whisper that still feels loud. "They're going to run," he says, "or they're going to fight. Either way, we learn." Outside, the Pacific remains vast and bright and indifferent. But in a chart room in Pearl Harbor, a librarian's pencil has turned blank water into a battlefield. And the first strike orders are about to send men straight into a place the enemy believed was still invisible. The first bombers don't arrive with drama. They arrive the way weather arrives, inevitable, loud, and too big to argue with. Out over the Pacific, the horizon is a clean line, and the sky above it looks innocent enough to forgive. Then the engines come through, heavy, synchronized, patient. Army Air Force's B-24 Liberators, their bellies full, noses pointed toward coordinates that only existed on American paper for a handful of days. Inside the lead aircraft, the navigator's chart is pinned under a clear plate, pencil marks darkened and redarkened until they feel permanent. The atoll has an American name now, typed on an operations board back at Pearl. But in the cockpit, it's just a circle and a grid reference, an agreement between men and a map that says, "This is real, even if you can't see it yet." You can almost feel the altitude in your teeth. The formation holds steady. The bomb bay doors remain closed. Nobody talks much. It's not superstition. It's focus. In the Pacific, you don't waste words. Water is too big, and the smallest miscalculation becomes a funeral. Then the sea below begins to change color. The deep blue drains into a pale turquoise, and the pilots see what Haskins saw. Surf breaking in a perfect ring, lagoon glass smooth inside, reef sharp as teeth. A place too pretty to be safe. The bombardier leans to his sight, adjusts, breathes out slowly. And on the lagoon's inner edge it appears, dark steel against pale water. A seaplane tender, small, purposeful. Nearby, a float plane with its wings folded like a bird at rest. A line of drums on shore. A radio mast that looks like nothing until you understand what it can do. Until you realize it can see for hundreds of miles with the right ears. The lead pilot's voice tightens over interphone. "Bomb bay doors, open." Metal shudders. Air howls. The bomb bay opens like a throat. Below, the atoll wakes up. Tiny figures scatter along the shore. Something on a sand spit swivels. An anti-aircraft gun. Too late to be elegant, but not too late to kill. Flashes jump. Black puffs bloom below the formation. Flak bursts like bruises in the sky. A tail gunner yells, "Flak! 12 o'clock low!" The pilot doesn't jink yet, not until the release. He keeps the line. That is the bargain. You hold steady so the bombs can be accurate, and you pray the enemy's math is slower than yours. The bombardier's hand hovers over the toggle. He calls the count, almost calm. Steady, steady. For a split second, the lagoon looks like a mirror waiting to be broken. Bombs away! The Liberator lurches as its weight changes. A chain of dark shapes drops cleanly into space, falling with a cold, orderly grace. Gravity does the rest. Down below, the first explosions hammer coral into white spray. The lagoon's calm surface fractures into shock waves. A bomb lands too close to the tender, and the water erupts under the hull, lifting it like a toy. Another detonates near the shoreline, throwing fuel drums end over end. A third strikes where crates are stacked, and the air turns into splinters. Then the lagoon catches fire. A thin flame becomes a rolling sheet as aviation gasoline ignites. Black smoke coils upward, thick and oily, and suddenly, the atoll doesn't look like a secret anymore. It looks like a signal. The second wave comes in while the first is still climbing out. More liberators. Then, lower, faster shapes. Navy aircraft, PB-4Y patrol bombers, and long-legged strike planes, skimming the edge of flak range, looking for the precise kill. A pilot lines up on the tender. The craft below tries to move, but lagoon water is a trap when you're trying to escape. The reef pass is narrow. The wake is a trail any predator can follow. The pilot squeezes the trigger. Bullets stitch the tender's deck. Something on the ship flashes, then disappears behind smoke. You can almost feel the terror of the men on that hull, trapped between reef and sky, between coral and American industry. The tender lists. Fire climbs. The lagoon becomes a cauldron. And in Pearl Harbor, in the dim intelligence room where the paper still lies spread open, Edwin Layton listens to the radio reports and watches what he really cares about. Not the destruction, but the reaction. Because Holmes was right. Hit the node, and the network twitches. FRUPAC's direction-finding teams begin to call in bearings. The Japanese station, once quiet, disciplined, breaks its routine. Messages burst out in quick, urgent transmissions, requests for assistance, warnings, fragments of procedure. The radio net that had been careful now bleeds emotion, and emotion is sloppy. Layton stands over the table with a grease pencil, marking arcs and intersections. This is the second war, the invisible one, and it is happening in real time. Here, a signals officer says, tapping a line on the plot. And here, they're relaying. Layton's eyes narrow. They're shifting traffic, he murmurs. They're moving it to the next lagoon. Holmes leans in. Which lagoon? He asks. Agnes Meyer, who has stayed quiet through most of the strike reports, reaches over and places her finger on a different atoll, one she'd marked earlier, the one with the densest revisions, the one that looked loved on the Japanese charts. This one, she says. They'll go here. It's surveyed like a hub. They thought it would never be seen. Layton stares at her finger, then at the FRUPAC bearings. The lines converge, near enough to make his stomach tighten. He looks up slowly. Cue the submarines, he says, and get patrol planes on that reef pass. Orders begin to race outward, but now they move with a new confidence. Not blind searching, directed hunting. Paper has become muscle. Out in the water, days later, a U.S. Navy submarine sits low, only its periscope showing, patient as a shark. The skipper, Captain George Street, lean-eyed and quiet, has been given something submariners almost never get in a war this wide: a likely place. He watches the reef pass through the periscope, the world above reduced to a thin strip. Sea, surf, a bite of lagoon. Time. Hours pass. Then, movement. A small ship, hugging the reef like it's trying to disappear into the coral shadow. Another behind it. A convoy without pride. Street's mouth goes dry. That's them, he whispers. He doesn't need to identify flags. In war, behavior identifies you better than color. Stand by, he says. The torpedo data computer clicks. Men murmur ranges, angles. The sub's hull creaks faintly, as if it's holding its breath too. Street waits until the lead ship is committed to the pass, until reef and geography have robbed it of options. Fire one, he says. The torpedo leaves with a kick you feel through the boat. Then another. The seconds stretch thin. And then the ocean erupts at the reef pass. an explosion that seems too violent for such a beautiful place. The lead ship breaks. Fire rolls across water. Men become specks, then disappear. Street lowers the periscope. His voice is calm, but there is something grim underneath it. "They're trying to run the chain," he says, "and we're cutting the links." In the weeks that follow, the Pacific Air War changes in a way most men won't notice until it's already happened. Japanese long-range flying boat patrols become less frequent. Their search coverage thins. Where once Allied task forces felt eyes on them, felt the invisible pressure of being watched, there are now gaps, blind spots in the enemy's gaze. Convoys move with fewer alarms. Carrier groups maneuver with more freedom. The ocean, which used to feel like a place the enemy could see through, starts to feel like a place that can hide you again. Not because the Japanese have stopped trying, but because their forward eyes have been forced back, step by step, away from the uncharted lagoons that once let them reach too far. In intelligence, you measure victory in minutes of warning, in miles of search arc, in the number of times your carriers aren't found. And those numbers begin to swing. Leighton watches the plots accumulate, radio bearings, reconnaissance photos, after-action reports. He watches patterns die. He watches the enemy grow cautious in a new way, like an animal that has realized the tall grass is no longer safe. One night, long after the first strike, he returns to the chart room. The smoke is thinner now. The fan still turns. Agnes Meyer is there, of course, at the same table, with the same posture, working under the same dented magnifying lamp. Her tracing overlays are stacked neatly now, each one labeled, each one an argument made with graphite. Leighton sets a folder down beside her. Inside are photos. Burning lagoon, shattered hull, black smoke spiraling into a clean sky. He doesn't say thank you at first. Intelligence officers don't always know how to speak to the people who save them in ways that don't look heroic. Meyer glances at the photos, then back to her work. "Did it hold?" she asks. Leighton understands what she means. Not the strike, the idea. "It held," he says. "They shifted, we followed. We hit the next site, and the next. They're losing the chain." Meyer's pencil slows. For a moment, the only sound is graphite on film. Then she speaks, very softly. "I used to think maps were about certainty," she says. "Borders, names, what belongs where." Leighton waits. "Now I think maps are about blindness," she continues. "About what people choose not to see." Leighton's voice is quiet too. "And about who pays for it," he says. Meyer sets her pencil down and finally looks up at him. Her eyes are tired but steady. "Will it change the war?" she asks. Leighton thinks of carrier decks, of pilots climbing into aircraft, of convoys crossing thousands of miles of ocean, of the way warning time can mean the difference between an ambush and an escape. He thinks of all the battles that never happen because someone saw first. "It already has," he says. Outside, Pearl Harbor is a constellation of lights on black water. Ships breathing at anchor. Cranes frozen like long-necked birds. The Pacific beyond it is still the largest thing on Earth. But it feels just slightly less infinite, because somewhere in that vastness, blank spaces have been filled, and hidden bases have been dragged into daylight. And a network that once gave the enemy reach has been cracked by something as simple and as deadly as attention. A librarian noticed what didn't belong on the page, and once you notice, you can't unsee. The ocean doesn't forgive mistakes, but it rewards clarity. And in the Pacific Air War, Clarity, more than courage, more than steel, can decide who lives long enough to see land again.